Hi, everyone. I hope you're having a really great afternoon. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about some delayed and missed dose simulations that I did for Eslicarbazepine. The issue that we were addressing in this particular project was adherence to dosing. And this is an important issue for the control of seizures. And the reported magnitude of non-adherence has ranged from 26% in the US to 67% in Nigeria. And the repercussion of this non-adherence is that the risk of seizure requiring hospitalization is as much as 21% higher in non-adherent patients. And then also, if they resume dosing inappropriately, it can result in higher than necessary drug concentrations, thus causing concern for potential toxicity. So to improve this situation, one of the things that has been done is to try to go to once daily dosing. So because it has typically improved adherence as compared to others. But there's still delayed and missed doses that occur, as we all have experienced in doing our modeling. So we also are looking at PK modeling and simulation to help understand what's going on with that concentration time profile after those delayed or missed doses, so that we can prospectively develop recommendations to help patients and clinicians to resume dosing without having an increased risk of toxicity. And then as a tag-on exploratory, we're also looking at understanding the CSF concentration time profile. Most of the simulation work was done based upon a previous PK model that included 10 phase 1 studies and 2 phase 3 studies with about 500 subjects and about 3,800 concentrations. That previous PK model was a simple one compartment, first order absorption and elimination. And for the densely sampled patients in phase 1, we were able to estimate Ka, clearance, and volume. And for the sparsely sampled patients in phase 3, we were able to estimate IIV and clearance. For clearance and volume, both were functions of weight and sex, with females having the lower values. For the exploratory CSF study, we had one phase 1 study, open label, multiple dose. So we were looking at steady state kinetics, and it involved 7 healthy subjects with males and females, and only 6 of them were actually able to give CSF samples. It included a dense profile for 24 hours with 12 plasma samples and 10 CSF samples. And as modelers, we always would love to see more subjects, but it would have been unethical to collect CSF in any more people than in this study. The observed data, we see that the CSF is much lower than the plasma concentrations. They have delayed peaks relative to the plasma, and the peak to trough ratio is much smaller in CSF than it is for plasma. And in this case, we had 2 individuals with delayed peaks and higher peaks in the plasma, and this was also shown in their CSF concentrations. To develop the model, we took the previous PK model, and for all the parameters involved, we fixed those to the Bayesian parameter estimates for those 6 subjects. Then we added a peripheral CSF compartment with just first order rate constants describing input and output. And in this case, because it was exploratory, we accepted parameters with what we would normally consider poor precision, but we did give it a limit of 50 to 100%. So we obtained the estimates for our first order rate constants and the volume, and we were able to estimate IIV for the volume and for the rate constant describing CSF back to plasma, but we were not able to get IIV on the one from plasma to CSF. So this is not what I would typically think is an awesome model because of the precision. But in terms of looking at the goodness of fit, it really did a nice job in that we don't have any biases with respect to time or across population predicted. And it's very well centered about the line of identity for population pred and IPRED. And then you can see for each of the individual subjects, the red line is the individual predicted, and it's following very closely with the observed data. And then the population pred in the blue line, we have about half above and half below, which also indicates that we do not have bias in the model. From there, we needed to start thinking about our simulation plan. And so, we can always simulate PK profiles, but then we have to think about what does the result mean? So to do this, we use the estimated Cmin and Cmax values for patients from the 2 monotherapy phase 3 trials that were used in the development of the PK model. For the lower limit, we thought about efficacy. We want to make sure people are not in danger of having seizures. And so for that lower limit, we took the mean predicted Cmin associated with patients that exited the studies prior to day 109. For the upper limit, we're thinking more of safety. And there we used the 90th percentile of the predicted Cmax for patients taking the largest dose. And this gave us a window of 12,619 to 43,430 nanograms per mil. For the population itself, a virtual patient in this case is defined by their weight and sex, because those were the 2 significant covariates in the PK model. So we randomly sampled with replacement from the phase 3 studies to develop 1,200 virtual subjects. They were then administered a dose escalation regimen, so 600 QD for 7 days, followed by 1,200 for 7 days, followed by 1,600 for 14 days. After that, on days 29, 30, and 31, that's where we experimented with delayed and missed doses. And we used the dose of 1,600 because it's the highest, and so they're more likely to see concentrations upon resumption in the, above the target range that we wanted. We did 11 simulations in total. One of them was taking everything scheduled as they're supposed to, the ideal perfect patient that never actually occurs. And then we started delaying the dose by 12, 16, all the way up to 48 hours, which would represent 2 missed doses. Then as we looked at resuming the dose, the 12-hour delay or 12 hours until the next dose, we looked at 1,600, which is the prescribed, 1.5 times the prescribed at 2,400, or double the prescribed at 3,200, up until 4 hours before the next dose. Then, of course, 24-hour, it's truly a missed dose. And then at the next scheduled dose on day 30, we did a similar resumption of dosing. For the 12-hour delay, I wish I could show you all the results, but I can only show you a couple. But for the 12-hour delay, the 1,600 on time is shown in the black circles, and it's well within the target range shown by the dashed lines. As we come down for the 12-hour delay, patients are starting to be below that therapeutic window. But then when we resume, if we resume dosing immediately with 1,600, you're back into the target range. And then if you go ahead and give another dose 12 hours later of that 1,600, it stays within the target range. Whereas if we immediately dose 1.5 times and then give another 1,600 dose on time, you're going to be above, and the same thing with the 3,200. Also, over on the CSF side, just as an exploratory look, we see that dosing with 1,600 immediately, followed by another 1,600 12 hours later, we see a profile similar to the 1,600 on time, although it is a little bit higher. For a 24-hour delay, patients, are below the therapeutic range, so they've been at risk for seizure for a few hours. But then if we dose with 1600 as scheduled, we're back within the range, but we're still well below where we would have been if we had taken everything on time. However, if we give a dose of 2400, 1.5 times the prescribed amount, then we're very, very similar to where we would have been if we had taken our dosing on time. Whereas 3200 puts us above the range. And so that 2400 dose is the winner in this case. For the CSF, we see that if we had only taken the prescribed dose, it's still going to be quite a bit lower over that next day. And then with the 2400, it's only lower for about half the day, and then it's back in line with the original prescribed amount. So in conclusion, while exploratory, that CSF PK model does adequately predict concentrations. And then the simulations show that if you remember your dose more than 4 hours before the next scheduled dose, then you should go ahead and take it as soon as you remember, and then resume dosing at the original scheduled time. So you're not going to wait 24 hours, you're just going to wait till that next scheduled time and resume your typical dose. But if you remember within 4 hours of the next scheduled dose time, then you should just go ahead and skip that dose. And then at the original time, take a single dose 1.5 times higher. And then on the following day, go back to your regular dosing regimen. But above all, the prescribed dose should not be doubled following a delayed or missed dose. I'd like to thank the co-authors on this paper. This was a fun little project that we did, and I enjoyed working on it. And I'd like to thank you for your time and attention. Are there any questions?
So as before, if anyone has any questions, feel free to send it in by chat or by Q&A. So Luann, now that you've had experience with this drug, do you think this approach should be applied more often for other drugs that have sort of identified target concentration range?
I would say that really for any drug, that something like this should be done, because when I first started this career, I was shocked at how often people did not follow their dosing regimen. Now I expect it. But even if you don't think it has a narrow window or anything like that, you can always define a window where you would like for people to be. And, looking based upon what you have for efficacy and what you have for safety, so that people get the most out of their dosing regimen that they can get. Because there's no point in risking not being efficacious or risking some potential toxicity if we can give them guidelines as to how to handle it when they're late with a dose or they miss a dose.
Okay, well, I think we're at the end of our time, and thank you again, Luann, for your very nice presentation. Since this is the end of the session, I just wanted to shout out to all of our presenters one more time, a big thank you, and also to our audience for your participation. We really appreciate it.